Ya, pero es que vosotros sois los que más o menos tenéis que saber apoyarnos, porque vosotros sois los que
te digo, yo mi idea, me han quitado de allí, habían dicho igual que allí, ahí se cierra y cuatro.
no podemos estar
Oiga.
Vale, ahora confirmo yo.
Temperatura de tipo Medellín. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?
Pues tenemos que esperar un poco todavía. Viene... Voy a poner el cable luego cuando igual. Viene con... Para allá. Voy a decir a Jorge.
No me quedo la comida. Sí, va, eso es mañana.
see it. Well, if we can we watch like people on TV watching the
No voy a hacerla, que no se puede. Pues a mí me sale esta margarita.
Un segundito, darle ese espacio.
Claro, no tenía más.
Presidente, por favor.
Vamos por la terraza.
más jóvenes.
Majestad, Presidente del Gobierno, Secretario General de la OTAN, presidentes del Gobierno, predecesores en la Secretaría General de la OTAN, Presidenta del Congreso, Presidente del Senado, Presidente del Consejo General del Poder Judicial, Vicepresidenta, ministros, ministras, embajadores, señoras y señores, Buenos días, bienvenidos a la celebración del 40 aniversario de la entrada de España en la OTAN en el Teatro Real. Muchas gracias por su presencia en este acto conmemorativo de la adhesión a la Alianza Atlántica, un día como hoy, 30 de mayo de 1982. Comenzamos con la interpretación de la obertura Leonora número 3 de Beethoven. Y ahora tiene la palabra el presidente del Gobierno, Pedro Sánchez.
Majestad, secretario general de la OTAN, Jens Stoltenberg, presidenta del Congreso, Meritxell Batet, presidente del Senado, Ander Gil, presidente del Consejo General del Poder Judicial, Carlos Lesmes, presidentes del Gobierno, Felipe González, José María Aznar, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, exsecretarios generales de la OTAN, William Klaes, Javier Solana, Lord George Robertson, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, vicepresidenta, ministros, ministras, alcalde de Madrid, embajadores permanentes de la OTAN, embajadores y jefes de misión acreditados en España, autoridades, señoras y señores, hoy estamos celebrando y recordando una fecha muy especial para nuestro país. El 30 de mayo de 1982, España se convertía en el miembro número 16 de la Organización del Tratado del Atlántico Norte. Cumplimos, en consecuencia, 40 años de alianza con un grupo de países que comparten esa forma de estar en el mundo que llamamos democracia. Sociedades que hemos elegido gobernarnos desde la libertad, desde la justicia, la igualdad y el pluralismo político. Esta pertenencia cumple una misión trascendental, sobre todo en estas fechas. Nos permite ser lo que somos y, además, garantiza que seremos lo que España decida ser. Porque no hablamos solamente de una alianza militar, con ser esto evidentemente importante, sino de una alianza entre países en defensa de los principios que originan la prosperidad y el bienestar de nuestros pueblos. Para todos nosotros, aquella adhesión supuso mucho más que un trámite multilateral. España comenzaba entonces una nueva andadura y también, yo diría, exitosa, tras décadas de oscuridad y de bloqueo como consecuencia de la dictadura franquista. Y lo hacíamos entonces llenos de esperanza, de fuerza, pero también, lógicamente, con incertidumbres que muchas cosas nacían de inercias y temores provenientes de nuestro pasado más reciente. La incorporación que hoy celebramos se debió en buena medida al esfuerzo conjunto del entonces presidente del Gobierno de España, Leopoldo Calvo Sotelo, y del que era secretario general de la OTAN, Joseph Lance, ambos ya fallecidos. Así que quisiera que estas primeras palabras fueran también en recuerdo de ambas personas, como también para el presidente Adolfo Suárez. Pero la joven democracia que éramos demandaba algo más. Era, en primer lugar, necesario hacer un reconocimiento del intenso debate que había en la sociedad española de entonces sobre la propia entrada y los términos de la participación de España en la organización. Y fue el presidente Felipe González el que, con valentía, con coraje, asumió el reto, planteando a la ciudadanía la conveniencia de permanecer en la Alianza Atlántica mediante un referéndum consultivo. El resultado, más de un 52% de votos a favor de la permanencia, convirtió a nuestro país, a España, en el primer país perteneciente a la OTAN por decisión popular, legitimando definitivamente el ingreso de España que hoy estamos celebrando. España quiso decidir por sí misma y lo que decidió fue algo muy sencillo, y es el regreso de España al espacio natural al que pertenecía en el orden mundial. Un espacio de seguridad, progreso, un espacio de garantías ante cualquier amenaza que pusiera en riesgo, en peligro, nuestra recién conquistada libertad y democracia. Posteriormente correspondió al Gobierno de José María Aznar dar un paso también muy importante a favor de la integración de España en la estructura militar de la OTAN. Una iniciativa que coincidió además con el término del mandato de Javier Solana como secretario general de la OTAN e implementada por su sucesor, Lord Robertson. Tras esta integración, en concreto el 1 de enero de 1999, España se convirtió en un sujeto activo de las estructuras de mando y fuerzas de la Alianza. En 2019 se aprobó el que hoy llamamos concepto estratégico de Lisboa, de nuestra vecina Lisboa, que todavía hoy rige los pasos de la Alianza, con el presidente José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero dirigiendo la participación de España en su elaboración. Sin embargo, la adhesión ilegal de Crimea por parte de Rusia en el año 2014 introdujo un cambio de escenario que superaba dicho concepto estratégico, tal y como se puso de manifiesto en la cumbre de Gales, en la que participaron el presidente de Rajoy y también el secretario general Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Señoras, señores, Majestad, he querido recordar todos estos hitos, no solo porque nos acompañan hoy aquí muchos de los protagonistas de los 40 años de España de pertenencia en la OTAN, a quienes lógicamente agradezco todo el esfuerzo de venir hoy aquí a Madrid a acompañarnos en esta fecha tan señalada, sino porque marcan el camino, también el contexto, que nos llevará en pocas jornadas a la celebración por segunda vez en la historia de nuestro país de una cumbre de la Alianza Atlántica en Madrid, en la capital de España. España ha vivido su pertenencia a la Alianza Atlántica con, yo diría, naturalidad. De su mano hemos abordado con éxito el reto de modernizar nuestras Fuerzas Armadas, que han sabido, por cierto, aprovechar esta gran oportunidad con un grado extraordinario de compromiso y de profesionalidad. Además, España ha realizado una aportación creciente, significativa, reconocida por todos los aliados, comprometiendo unidades para las fuerzas de respuesta y la participación en la mayoría de las operaciones y misiones que se han desarrollado por parte de la OTAN. La OTAN también nos ha ayudado, sin duda, a cimentar la relación de España con el mundo occidental y, en especial, con un vínculo transatlántico que se ha devenido, diría incluso, aún más importante en estas fechas, con Estados Unidos en consecuencia y también con Canadá. Y, además, la OTAN ha contribuido enormemente a un bien público fundamental que hoy cada vez vemos con mayor importancia, que es la seguridad. Entre otros factores, porque la democracia que nuestras sociedades disfrutan y la prosperidad también de nuestros ciudadanos necesitan imperiosamente de la seguridad, porque cuando nuestras sociedades están en peligro, todos sus fundamentos corren el riesgo de colapsar. Así, por desgracia, lo estamos comprobando con extraordinaria crudeza en estos últimos y trágicos meses. Nos enfrentamos al que probablemente sea el mayor desafío para la OTAN en su historia reciente. También lo es para una organización tan importante para España como es la Unión Europea y, en definitiva, para el orden internacional que construimos todos juntos después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Las atrocidades cometidas en la guerra de Ucrania, la brutalidad y la destrucción y la muerte injustificable de víctimas inocentes nos obligan a condenar, en primer lugar, sin paliativos, las acciones del presidente Putin, que suponen una violación flagrante del derecho internacional. Pero Putin es evidente que no va a lograr sus objetivos, porque todos los aliados le hemos demostrado, y lo vamos a seguir haciendo todos los días que dure esta guerra, que nuestra firmeza en el apoyo a Ucrania es inquebrantable. Desde el principio ha quedado claro que la unidad y la cohesión entre aliados es la mejor arma de disuasión de la OTAN para impedir una escalada del conflicto. Desencadenar la guerra es la única forma que ha encontrado Putin para frenar las legítimas aspiraciones que tienen sociedades como la ucraniana de avanzar hacia la democracia, el Estado de Derecho, el respeto a los derechos humanos, la solidaridad y la paz. Y lo ha hecho por una única razón, y es porque la amenaza que representa la democracia para su propio régimen autoritario es realmente lo que le preocupa. Por eso, frente a los enemigos de las sociedades abiertas, como las que defendemos los aliados de la Alianza Atlántica, debemos acertar en nuestras decisiones y en la definición de nuestro futuro más inmediato. El primer paso, sin duda alguna, es preservar la unidad de todos los que creemos en la democracia, en el Estado de Derecho, en el orden internacional basado en normas que protegen aquellos principios tan elementales como son las libertades civiles y las libertades políticas. Los lazos que vinculan a la OTAN, a los miembros también de la Unión Europea y a muchos otros países de la comunidad internacional nacen de un sentimiento compartido de justicia e igualdad y que expresan la determinación con la que vamos a defender nuestros principios y nuestros valores. Por eso la unidad, además, es esencial para fortalecer nuestra seguridad. La guerra de Ucrania ha abierto los ojos, sin duda alguna, a las sociedades europeas, también a la sociedad española. Muchas personas han entendido que nuestra seguridad no está garantizada de forma indefinida, que la peor adversidad, como hemos visto hace muy pocas semanas, puede instalarse con rapidez en nuestras realidades y corromperlo todo. Precisamente por ello, es necesario el esfuerzo coordinado y diario de los aliados para preservar esa libertad. Hoy nuestra seguridad está amenazada por el régimen de Putin y, por tanto, apoyar a Ucrania con decisión es la única forma de asegurar que la Europa y el mundo, yo diría, que hemos construido, tengan un futuro cierto. Es imprescindible, en consecuencia, que reforcemos nuestra capacidad de disuasión, lo cual, sin duda alguna, va a exigir capacidades militares modernas, capaces, disponibles, que solo se adquieren mediante un aumento de la inversión en defensa. Somos muy conscientes de ello. Pero también sé, y es algo que tenemos que transmitir a nuestras sociedades, y sin duda alguna lo voy a hacer a la sociedad española, que debemos hacer ese esfuerzo. Porque mucho mayor es el coste de quedarse de brazos cruzados mientras se pone en jaque lo más elemental, lo más fundamental de nuestras sociedades, como es la libertad y nuestro modelo de convivencia pacífica y democrática. Una de las principales consecuencias de la guerra de Putin, completamente contraria a sus objetivos estratégicos al inicio del conflicto, ha sido la revitalización de la OTAN. En pocas semanas celebraremos aquí la que probablemente sea una de las cumbres más importantes, más trascendentales en sus 73 años ya de historia. En Madrid vamos a definir lo que se llama la estrategia de la organización para la próxima década, el concepto estratégico, con la novedad de las candidaturas de dos importantes países europeos como son Suecia y Finlandia. Dos democracias consolidadas cuya aportación a la Alianza Atlántica tendrá un enorme valor. Y será además el momento de impulsar todos juntos la estrategia 360 grados y de proyectar un mensaje poderoso, una vez más, de unidad y de complementariedad entre la Unión Europea y la OTAN. Una unión hoy esencial, aún más esencial, para la defensa de nuestro modelo de convivencia. Porque no hay otro camino. Si queremos ofrecer un legado de libertad, de democracia y de paz a las próximas generaciones, a las generaciones de nuestros hijos, hijas, nietos y nietas, debemos tomar decisiones que refuercen nuestra alianza y la doten de las herramientas y las capacidades adecuadas para abordar los desafíos que tenemos por delante. Tenemos que mostrar, en definitiva, nuestra determinación de hacer de la Alianza Atlántica una alianza más fuerte y más eficaz en el siglo XXI. El nuevo concepto estratégico, el concepto estratégico de Madrid, es nuestra primera oportunidad, y yo la calificaría de meditada y también consensuada, para afrontar ese futuro con decisión y dar a responder a los nuevos retos, pero también al renacimiento, como estamos viendo a las puertas de Europa, de viejas amenazas que creíamos superadas para siempre, sin duda alguna la guerra. Quiero señalar que este nuevo concepto estratégico no se va a limitar solamente a la cuestión militar convencional. Como consecuencia de la creciente importancia de las llamadas amenazas híbridas, la crisis climática, la emergencia alimentaria, entre otras, exacerbada ahora mismo por el conflicto en Ucrania, va a ir ese concepto estratégico mucho más allá. La organización de la Cumbre de Madrid, Majestad, Secretario General, señoras y señores, es una enorme responsabilidad para España que asumimos con profundo honor y con un extraordinario orgullo. Pero también la entendemos como una gran oportunidad para mostrar al conjunto de la ciudadanía española las ventajas de estos 40 años de pertenencia a la organización y compartir con toda ella, con toda la ciudadanía española, los debates estratégicos del presente y del futuro para nuestras sociedades y para la OTAN. Porque tenemos mucho camino por recorrer y queremos hacerlo juntos, de la mano de nuestros compatriotas, que son, en definitiva, a quienes nos dirigimos y a quienes defendemos. En resumen, 40 años después, quienes heredamos todo el esfuerzo de los presidentes del Gobierno que nos acompañan y los que, por desgracia, ya no están con nosotros, de los secretarios generales de la OTAN que hoy nos acompañan y aquellos otros que no están, podemos asegurar que pertenecer a la OTAN es fundamental para garantizar lo que somos, nuestro modo de vida, nuestra estabilidad y el futuro de las generaciones próximas. Los aliados hemos elegido estar, yo diría que en el lado correcto de la historia, defendiendo una vez más la paz, el derecho internacional y hacerlo además con convicción y sin temor, promoviendo todo aquello que los aliados defendemos. Y es, en definitiva, un mundo más justo, próspero y seguro. Así que, feliz aniversario y muchas gracias.
It is a great honor to have the Secretary General of NATO amongst us. Please welcome Mr. Jens Stoltenberg to the floor.
Your Majesty, Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is really an honor and pleasure to be here today with you to celebrate 40 years of Spain within the NATO alliance. And I would like to thank His Majesty King Felipe for his strong personal commitment to our transatlantic alliance, to our armed forces, and to our security. In the late 1970s, after dark decades of dictatorship, Spain sought a new path, one committed to freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Values that lie at the heart of the NATO alliance. And in 1982, Spain became our 16th member, proudly joining a family of free, democratic nations across Europe and North America. And let me thank my predecessors who join us today. Willy Claes, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, Lord Robertson, Javier Solana, and Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, who could not be with us today. You steered our alliance through 4 decades of incredible change. From the height of the Cold War to the fall of the Berlin Wall. From the Balkans wars to 9/11. And from Afghanistan to the illegal annexation of Crimea. Throughout these 4 decades, Spain has stood united with its NATO allies in maintaining security across the Euro-Atlantic area, protecting our people and our shared values, and helping to change and adapt our alliance every time the world changed and new challenges arose. With both Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts, Spain holds a vital strategic position, resting at the crossroads between Europe, Africa, and North America. It is both a border between continents and a bridge between cultures. As such, it plays a central role in protecting us from threats from all points of the compass. Your membership in NATO has made our military more modern, more capable, and more deployable. Over the past 4 decades, Spain has contributed greatly to our alliance. You play a key role in NATO's missions and operations. Spanish forces have helped maintain the stability of the Western Balkans through NATO missions in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. They contributed over many years to our mission in Afghanistan. And I thank and honor all those who served so bravely there, those who made the ultimate sacrifice, and their families and loved ones. Today, Spanish soldiers are a crucial part of NATO's training mission in Iraq to help ensure Daesh never returns. Spanish pilots take part in Baltic air policing. Spanish sailors serve in our maritime missions, and Spain hosts the Aegis ballistic missile defense ships in Rota. This shows that together we are ready to defend every inch of Allied territory from any threat, from any direction. Whenever I have met with Spanish service women and men, I'm always impressed by their dedication and professionalism. I met some of them recently with Prime Minister Sanchez when he visited NATO's battle group in Latvia, serving alongside Allied forces from both sides of the Atlantic. NATO solidarity in action. And therefore, I would also like to thank Prime Minister Sanchez for his personal leadership within our alliance. Pedro, your commitment to transatlantic security is and remains vital. And also many thanks to your predecessors for their support of NATO over many, many years. In response to Russia's brutal and unprovoked war in Ukraine, Spain is playing an important part in strengthening our deterrence and defense, deploying additional troops, ships and jets to strengthen NATO's defense of Europe. You are also providing critical support for Ukraine with security assistance and humanitarian aid to uphold Ukraine's right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, help end the war and achieve the peaceful solution that Ukraine deserves and we all want. Back in 1997, Madrid hosted an historic summit. Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic were invited to open talks to join our alliance. Former adversaries became new friends. That summit marked a new age of hope and aspiration. NATO's open door and the European Union's enlargement helped spread freedom, democracy, and prosperity across Europe. It was and remains an historic success. Next month, Madrid will host another historic summit. This time, however, the context is very different. Not a fresh burst of freedom, but a cold blast of conflict. Russia is waging war of aggression against Ukraine. Authoritarian regimes seek to undermine the rules-based international order. China's coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. And China has joined Russia in openly contesting the right of each and every country to choose its own path. We also face brutal terrorism, instability from the south, sophisticated cyber attacks, disruptive new technologies, nuclear proliferation, and the security consequences of climate change. Together, these challenge our security and our democratic way of life. At the Madrid summit, we will chart the way ahead for the next decade. We will reset our deterrence and defense for a more dangerous world. We will deepen our cooperation with like-minded countries and organizations, including the European Union and countries in the Indo-Pacific. We will also be joined by Finland and Sweden, who have just made historic applications to join our alliance. The Madrid summit is an important opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to NATO's values and the vital importance of Europe and North America working together in NATO. As we look to the future, Spain will continue to play a key role in our alliance, because in this age of increasing global competition, our unity is our strength. Thank you so much.
Now it's my honor to invite the secretaries to the stage. Good morning, Mr. Lord Robertson, Mr. Willy Klaas, Mr. Javier Solana, Mr. Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Good morning. Today we're very proud to be celebrating the anniversary of Spain's entry into NATO. 40 years have passed since the historic protocol formalizing this membership was signed. Modern Spain is explained by its determination to position itself within the European institutional architecture. Its democratic transition culminated with entry into NATO and the European Union. Belonging to the Atlantic Alliance has helped consolidate Spain as a committed ally in political, strategic, and operational matters, and as a partner loyal to the principles of cohesion and solidarity amongst the 30 member countries. During this time, Spain has changed profoundly, and with its entry into NATO, it joined a group of allied countries with which it shares values, principles, and interests. For this reason, multilateralism is a key plank in our approach. As the Spanish generals underline, wherever there is a NATO flag waving, there is a Spanish soldier. Our country has come a long way from the first mission within NATO in 1992 up to the recently announced deployment in Lithuania. This will mark the second time Spain hosts a NATO summit. The first was in 1997, while Mr. Javier Solana was Secretary General, and now we're proud to be hosting a summit at such a crucial historic moment for our democracies, a transcendent summit, as the President Sanchez just mentioned. And today we have managed to bring together some of the main protagonists of these last 4 years in NATO to hear about your experiences in office as former Secretary Generals. So please, Mr. Willy Klaas, in office from 1994 to 1995. I would like to hear you about your reflection of this anniversary. You want to start, Mr. Solana?
Sure.
I will prefer, Mr. Klaas, to follow the chronological order.
Okay. Now, thank you very much. Your Majesty, it's a great pleasure to be here celebrating this anniversary. The Secretary General of NATO has mentioned that Spain had already another summit in 1997. In that summit, three very important decisions were taken. The first, as has been said by him, the enlargement for the first time of the alliance. The second, that we should not forget, is that we created in that summit the Council NATO-Russia. And the third thing that we created was the NATO-Ukraine Council. So we had an idea at that time of how things could evolve. Unfortunately, those councils were going down in interest along the time, and we couldn't finish the ideas, the fundamental ideas that were taken in Madrid. Now, if I were to talk to you very frankly, as I should, I think that at this point in time, the most important thing that the people which are gathered here, it would be to ask clearly and logically for a ceasefire immediately in the region. Russia has failed. Russia wanted to take the capital, Kiev, then get rid of the government, and then appoint a government that will avoid President Putin. That has not taken place. Therefore, I think that this is the moment, once Russia has not been able to get his objective, to try seriously to have a ceasefire. And for that, all of us, all the countries represented here, have to make an effort because we should be able to do it. I remember a few days ago when I hear that the Secretary of Defense of the United States, in the first conversation that had with the Secretary of Defense from the Russian Federation, was we need to construct a ceasefire. I would like very much to really sum up my voice to that conversation of the two Secretaries of State from Russia and from the United States. That would allow the people of Ukraine to recuperate their lives, to look forward for a while at least, and to really the political side of Ukraine also to get together and turn into what we can be the exit at the end of this ceasefire. But for me, the ceasefire is a must, and whatever we can do, we should do it.
Please feel free to continue.
Okay. First of all, congratulations, Spain. Congratulations, NATO. During my mandate as Prime Minister of Denmark and Secretary General of NATO, I worked closely with three presidents of the Spanish government, Aznar, Zapatero, Rajoy, and I appreciate very much your unwavering support and your commitment to NATO missions. During my tenure as Secretary General of NATO, we conducted 6 operations on 3 continents. We adopted a new strategic concept. We developed a new approach, smart defense, to get more value for our defense money. We prepared a readiness action plan to strengthen our territorial defense in the East, and we decided that all allies will live up to the 2% target before 2025. And under current security circumstances, that is more necessary than ever. We made NATO fitter, faster, more flexible. That's exactly what we need now. Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has taught us that we cannot take freedom and democracy for granted. We will have to fight for it. And the Ukrainians have the will to fight. We must give them the means to fight. Heavy weapons, and we must stop the financing of Putin's war by a complete stop to import of Russian oil and gas. If the Russians stop fighting, we will have peace. If the Ukrainians stop fighting, we will have no Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are fighting on behalf of all of us. That's why I say, with the Ukrainians, Slava Ukraini.
Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, 2 or 3 considerations. First of all, the regime in Moscow we are facing today can be compared with the darkest period of the Stalinist period. So the situation is dangerous and even unpredictable. So, conclusion has to be, it is our duty to reinforce NATO capabilities and to enlarge Finland, Sweden, even if this is not, in my opinion, to say it as the French are doing, a petit cadeau, adding 1,300 kilometers of frontiers in Finland with Russia. Mr. Secretary General, you will face some military and strategic problems in doing so. But it is your duty, and you have to support this. Second consideration, I have the feeling that this conflict will provoke a fundamental geostrategical change in the world. We cannot exclude the risk of a new structure in which authoritarian states are confronted with the democracies. Let us look very attentively what Beijing is doing in trying to enlarge the little coalition of the BRICS. It can be the start of an adversary structure towards the West. So once again, our answer has to be a reinforcement of NATO. Last consideration, of course, we have to do all what is possible to help our Ukrainian friends. And I think it's time to reinforce the weaponry Ukraine is asking for. And I know there are some doubts because one cannot negate the military capabilities of Russia. My last consideration, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are underestimating the evolution of modern weapons in which modern technologies have been integrated. So humanity is facing serious risks. So nevertheless, we are obliged to support the Ukrainians. We have to find a point of contact in which we will discuss the control of weaponry and, in a second step, the disarmament. I think it is inevitable on the moment that we are supposed making big efforts in order to save our climate. But let's not forget the risks we are facing with the combination of weaponry and modern technology. So, thank you.
Your Majesty, Prime Minister, thank you kindly for the invitation to come here and celebrate 40 years of Spain within NATO. When I came to NATO in 1999, I followed a Spaniard as the Secretary General. The most visible demonstration of Spain's incorporation into this alliance. I recall the ratification procedure in the British Parliament. I was a very new and young member of Parliament when we endorsed the membership of Spain in NATO. And for those of us who had some memories of the dark days of dictatorship in Spain, that was an amazing feeling to have. And then to come to NATO and to follow Javier Solana in the position of Secretary General was quite a move forward for me. I was also able to appoint a Spaniard to the first senior military position when I appointed General Ortego to be the commander of the Kosovo force, the commander of KFOR. I don't know whether the general is in the audience here tonight, but he was a superb representative of his country. So here we are celebrating 40 years of Spain's membership of NATO at a time when we are now welcoming 2 new applicant members for NATO in the vanguard of the Madrid summit. I have to say that I spent 4 years trying to persuade Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and Vladimir Putin managed it in 4 weeks. And they will enrich the alliance tremendously, this alliance of free nations covering 1 billion people, like-thinking people in the world today. And never was there a greater challenge to the NATO alliance than we face at the moment. The unprovoked attack by Russia on Ukraine is something that has changed geopolitics fundamentally and perhaps forever. And as somebody who got to know Vladimir Putin in his earliest days, who signed with him the Rome Declaration in 2002, his signature on the Rome Declaration endorsed the principle that every country had the right to make its own decision about its own security, a commitment like so many others that he's broken, from the United Nations Charter through the Budapest Memorandum, the NATO-Russia Founding Act. He's broken the one that he himself signed that day. And I don't think it is for us, any of us in NATO today, to decide at what point the Ukrainians will stop fighting. Our obligation is to ensure that the Ukrainians have the ability to fight against the aggression that is taking place in their country today. And that is why I endorse the views that have been expressed of giving the Ukrainians the means to fight, the heavy weapons, the training of their troops that is so desperately needed at the moment in order to counter the onslaught of the Russian forces. And let them decide at what point they stop the fighting and start the discussions with anybody else in the world today. Our great alliance of 30 countries, and soon to be 32 countries, is facing perhaps its biggest test, and yet with an absolute resolution that we stand for freedom, for liberty, and the right for countries to make their own choice today. So as we celebrate 40 years of this great country being part of the alliance, let us ensure that in the future we can guarantee for the people of Ukraine the same rights that we celebrate protecting here today.
You all agree that this moment is crucial, transcendental, historic, and dangerous also. I know it's hard to do predictions, but based on your experience, how do you think it will evolve? In the short term, at least.
I think the biggest risk is a prolonged conflict. And we have to make sure that Putin does not get a success in Ukraine, because he won't stop. If he gets success in Ukraine, next victim might be Moldova, then Georgia, and eventually he will also put pressure on the 3 Baltic states. We have to make sure that Putin does not succeed in Ukraine. And if Russian troops do not leave Ukraine, then we will get into difficulties in rebuilding Ukraine. Because as long as Russian troops in Ukraine, you will still have war, because the Ukrainians will not surrender. That's why actually we have to kick out the Russians from Ukraine to get peace, a lasting peace, and to engage in a comprehensive rebuilding of a new Ukraine. And that's actually what gives me hope, that we have a chance to rebuild Ukraine, not only buildings, infrastructure, etc., but also politically, to get rid of corruption and the oligarch system, to build a new, solid, free democracy. That would be ultimate success.
I think that for the European citizens that may be worried and some scared maybe about the possibility of having in Europe an extended war that goes beyond the present war, I think we have to tell them that if that were the case, it will not be, NATO is there to defend us, because the members of the European Union today, most of them, all of them, are members without Austria, the only one, but once Sweden and Finland enter, the whole of the European Union will be part of NATO. And therefore it will be a defense for whatever happens by NATO to the European citizen. So the European citizen may be, if I may say, I'm going to say relaxed, but thinking that they will have a defended by Europeans and by NATO. But I think that the European Union people are concerned not only about the possibility of an attack on their homes, but are concerned about the consequences of the war in their own lives. And if you think, for instance, that the level of prices of oil, of gas, are going up, tracing to levels that we didn't expect as a cause of the war, it's important that the war is ended as soon as possible in order to give the prices of oil will come back to the reality that it should be today. The second thing that I'm concerned about is the consequences of the war outside the European Union. And I'm not thinking on the rich countries of the world, but I do know very well at this point in time the level of hunger in many countries of the world is increasing. Poverty is increasing in the world. And it's increasing because Ukraine and Russia exported around 30% of the food that is eaten in the world. And today, it's not being exported. So the sooner we can get that food, which is in the soil of Ukraine, the better for the rest of the cities of the world. So I think that the second claim that I will do for today is to guarantee, to ask the two sides, in particular the Russians, that they allowed the export through the sea with Ukraine that doesn't have any port at this point in time, Odessa. And the possibility of getting that food, which is in there, to be transported to the countries in which that is needed. That will be another sign, important sign of what is NATO about. We are concerned about war, we are concerned about those who are fighting, but we are concerned also of the consequences that may have in the rest of the world. And therefore is the most vulnerable of the world people which are suffering now from the hunger. And I think this should be another preoccupation when we gather in this type of meetings, another preoccupation to think about. And I would like very much make a statement on that, in that sense.
I fully agree with the comment given by our Danish colleague. So we cannot permit Putin to obtain a victory, because he will not stop there. He will have following steps. So indeed, we have to increase our military efforts for the moment. I know what I've said in my first conclusion, it is in paradox with what I'm saying now, but indeed we have to stop Putin. Afterwards, maybe we can be inspired by the conclusions of the so-called Normandy group. That means that the eastern provinces of Ukraine will be Ukrainian territory, but giving some autonomy and respect for the Russian language, because there is a problem. Let's be clear. Second idea, I know we are speaking NATO, but let me say one word about European Union. We cannot go on with the rule of unanimity concerning foreign policy and even fiscality and so on. We have to change fundamentally this, so what the European Union is urgently needing is the deepening of the structure and the disappearance of this stupid rule of unanimity, even in the dialogue with Washington. Because I'm not so convinced that the short-term objective of Washington is the same as the Europeans are developing. So what we need at that point is a common foreign policy in Europe, and that needs the disappearance of the unanimity rule, which is a very serious handicap for all those who have been a member of the European Council of Ministers. So that you know all the difficulties we have met there. That's my second conclusion. What we need much more than ever is Europe speaking with one voice and acting as one person. That's a necessity.
I'm not going to follow that to its logical conclusion, because foreign ministers today are meeting in Brussels trying to seek unanimity on an oil embargo. And let us hope that they arrive at unanimity, because the pressure on Russia needs to be more considerable than it is today. Of course, we are all paying the price for Russia's aggression. The rise in inflation, the effect on food production, supply chain disruption, all of this has had a dramatic effect. And we have an obligation as politicians, or even those of us who are yesterday's men, to get over the message that that price is worth paying. Because the Ukrainians are not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for a principle, and that is the right of self-determination and the right of people to live without the threat of being invaded and crushed by a neighbouring country. So there is that obligation to do much more to get the message over. The second thing is that we need also to offer to the decent people of Russia a prospect that after this episode in their lives, there is a role for Russia in the world still to play. The majority of the Russian population are being denied any information about this war, denied even the right to call it what it is, a war. And when the scales have dropped from their eyes and they realize the brutality and the horror of what Russian troops are inflicting upon their fellow Slavs in the neighboring country, then they will realize just what Vladimir Putin has brought to them. So offering them a prospect for Russia in the future is something we need to get across. During the Cold War, we used every mechanism possible to get a message through the Iron Curtain at that time. And eventually people realized beyond the Iron Curtain that there was a better life out there, and these countries are now inside the alliance, inside the European Union. So we need to get that message across to the Russians, that what is happening in their name is unacceptable and something that the world is simply not going to tolerate. In the meantime, a very heavy price is going to be paid for all of us while we continue to give them the moral, financial, and military support that will be necessary for them to win this conflict.
Before concluding, the nations of Europe, the European citizens, are living this situation with great concern and are wondering how peace and security can be guaranteed. What message of hope can you transmit to the citizens of the Alliance?
Well, the hope that we can express and hope that it will be accepted by the majority of the people is that the world today is very complicated, that we are seeing even the beginning of deglobalization. We may have even the possibility, the drama of having a world decoupled, and those things will be very dramatic, I think, economically, politically. So we have to recreate, to see how we recreate step by step some of the things that we have lost. I may be a classic, or I may be an old-fashioned thinker, but I do think that foreign policy should be based on having all the channels of communication always open. That is what we did, that was what I did, and I'm afraid this is not what is being done today.
Yeah, on a very tragic backdrop, I also see some light at the end of the tunnel. One thing is that Putin has managed to to create a stronger NATO, stronger unity among Europeans, stronger unity across the Atlantic, the transatlantic alliance in the broad sense of word has been strengthened. NATO will soon be joined by Finland and Sweden. And actually, I'm very happy about that development against a very tragic backdrop. And as I indicated previously, I also think it gives us a chance to actually rebuild a new Ukraine. I've met a lot of young Ukrainians, and they are talented, well-educated people. They are longing for a new future without corruption, without all the oligarchs to dominate the public life in Ukraine. And it gives me hope that once this war is over, and one day it will be over, once it's over, then we can start rebuilding really from scratch a new Ukraine. And finally, it also gives me hope that I think not only the young generation, but several generations now have learned a lesson from history, that appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace, but to war and conflict. I think we can get rid of the naivety that has dominated our relationship, not least with Mr. Putin. I've met Putin a lot of times, and I have learned the lesson. He only respects one language, the language of force, strength, unity. And that's also what gives me hope. Once this war is over, I hope that we can develop a new, more sustainable relationship between the West and Russia. We need that.
Maybe that I'm going to make some remarks which are less sympathetic, but what is the attitude in the world today towards the sanctions? Of course, China is not playing with us. That's not a surprise. But do we understand clearly what India is doing? Increasing the energy commerce with Russia factor 4. Indonesia, president of the G20, is not implementing sanctions, on the contrary. South America, let's be clear, Mexico, Argentina, even Brazil is not very enthusiastic about the sanctions we have taken. South Africa, Southern Africa is not playing with us. In the assembly of the UN, where there was a vote about the sanctions, 17 member states of the UN of Africa didn't vote with us, 17. Can we have a discussion on the attitude of the Arab countries, and especially Saudi Arabia? The situation is very complicated, and as I've said, at this moment, unpredictable. Nevertheless, we have to maintain more than ever the solidarity both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States, Canada, and Europe. A united Europe, I insist, a united Europe, speaking with one voice. And once we have established peace in Ukraine, and I understand what you say and fully agree. We have to do together all what is possible to rebuild that country. We have to think clearly how to develop the new geostrategical links in the world. And it is a very complicated challenge. For the moment, as me concerning, unpredictable and very dangerous. But having said that, first things first, let's take the measures necessary to help our Ukrainian friends in order to stop Putin. If we take the risk to give him some victory, he will continue. That's clear. So we have to stop him. That's clear. Thank you.
I strongly agree with that. And Vladimir Putin has succeeded in several ways that he never intended. He's brought a new determination and unity among European nations. He's bound the United States to Europe in a way that he thought he could break. And he's persuaded 2 new nations to apply for membership of NATO. That is a signal failure in the objectives that he set out. He's also managed to remind our populations of just how important national security, national resilience is, and how important the NATO alliance is as well. Because the NATO alliance is not, as we know, simply a military alliance. It's a political organism which has over the years achieved much. I've got a very vivid memory of my time in NATO, not just in declaring Article 5 for the first time, but with Javier Solana intervening in what was going to be a civil war in what was then called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And at the end of that year, when Javier had created a peace agreement, the Ohrid Agreement, and NATO had disarmed the insurgents at the time, we went down to the Tetovo Valley and were greeted by large numbers of children there who wouldn't have known the difference between NATO and the EU or Aldi or Tesco, but who knew that something big had happened and something had arrived. And these young children in mixed villages there would today be refugees if that war had not been stopped by a combination of a military alliance and a diplomatic superpower at that time. And it's remained in my mind. And last year, I went back for the 20th anniversary of the Ohrid Agreement and met some of the people, the insurgents of the time, and was introduced to them by the now Minister of Interior of North Macedonia. And it's a huge pleasure to have the permanent representative of North Macedonia here today. So we've reminded people, and Vladimir Putin has reminded people of the importance of the organization and how vital it is to all of our safety and security. So all of us ancient representatives of the Secretary General class wish the current incumbent of the job all our best wishes and good luck for the year that he's got ahead of him. This is maybe the best time not to be Secretary General of NATO. But we wish you all the very best because, as Willie Claes has said, we live in a very complicated world where the geostrategic kaleidoscope has been shattered and we don't know where the pieces will land. And you and the members of the North Atlantic Council will have huge responsibilities in the year that is coming to ensure that safety and security is guaranteed in the way that 40 years of NATO have done so for Spain.
If I may add, let's follow clearly what's going on in Bosnia, where Putin is playing a strange role in Serbia, and one cannot exclude that we are going to new conflicts in Bosnia, provoked by Serbia, which signed a new agreement with Putin last week for 3 following years. So the situation, even in the Balkans, is still preoccupying.
We have some new problems, but some of the old ones are still with us. Yeah.
We have to leave the discussion here. It was really very interesting, very exciting, inspiring to listen to you, and I thank you all for participating. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure to see you. I have played
Tiene la palabra Su Majestad el Rey.
Presidente del Gobierno, Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Presidente del Congreso de los Diputados, Presidente del Senado, Presidente del Tribunal Supremo y el Consejo General del Poder Judicial, expresidentes del Gobierno, exsecretarios generales de la OTAN, ministros del Gobierno, embajadores, representantes permanentes de los aliados en el Consejo del Atlántico Norte, presidente del Comité Militar, autoridades civiles y militares, señoras y señores. Hoy nos congregamos para conmemorar el 40 aniversario de la adhesión de España a la OTAN, un paso histórico tras nuestra ejemplar transición hacia una sociedad democrática y moderna que nos permitió integrarnos plenamente en la esfera política europea y atlántica y, en definitiva, internacional. Este es un momento muy especial para nuestro país y me honra enormemente que podamos celebrarlo con algunos de los principales responsables que han contribuido a trazar esta historia de éxito.